Hey, this is Dave from the Adobe Character Animator team, and recently I created a explainer style video about why I thought video game subscription services were the future. It's a 5-minute animated piece that includes a narrator character that I created in Photoshop and then animated using Performance Capture in Character Animator, and then composited everything together in Adobe After Effects. These type of explainer videos are really popular. You see them all the time, and a lot of you were asking in the comments how I put everything together. So this video is going to be a full workflow walkthrough of everything from the initial script to recording that, animating and editing a performance in Character Animator, and finally linking everything together and compositing it in After Effects. There's a lot here, so we're dividing it into 8 different parts, so you can look in the video description below to skip ahead if you want to. But I hope it's helpful for making your own explainer style videos, so let's get started. So not surprisingly, everything kind of starts with a script. So I wrote my script in Google Docs on my train commute in and out of work, and it's about 12, 13 paragraphs, something like that. I just continually edited it. I would cut whole sections that didn't feel like they were adding to the argument. I would move things around constantly, saying, I think this feels a little stronger down here. But basically, I'm just trying to tell the story, and it helps when it's something you're passionate about. So I love video games. I felt like this was really easy and fun to write, and I think those are the type of projects that you'll get the most mileage out of when you're really invested in the subject matter, and you can speak in kind of a conversational tone. So I'm not writing this like a term paper or an essay or something like that. I tried to add language that felt like I was just being conversational, and I think that helps with the pacing and the flow and making it all feel a little bit more natural. And then when I was ready to record, I just made this way larger so it was easy to read and basically be a teleprompter for me to record the voiceover. So the next step is to record your audio. I'm using an Audio-Technica USB mic, and I've got a pop filter hooked on that to help with the harsher sounds like S's and popping sounds and that sort of thing. But I've got that hooked up to my computer, so I'm going to click here in Audition Record. That looks good. Click OK, and just going to start recording. So you can see as I'm talking right now, it's showing the waveform. Now, this is looking a little too hot. Right now, I'm getting in the red zone a little bit down here. You can see with your little levels monitor. Typically, I never really want to see red, and I particularly don't want to see this. When the 2 red things stick here, that means it's peaked. And you can see, if I pause right here, that moment where it peaked right here, that means the signal, the input signal is so loud that it's going to basically the limits of the microphone input, and you don't want to do that. That leads to a harsh popping sound, and you want to avoid that as much as possible. So your audio preferences and everything are going to be in your computer's settings. So here, let's say I was using my internal microphone built in. This is looking a little bit on the higher side, so I'm going to move it down a little bit so the signal is not going to be as loud. That looks good. And then let's try this again, click record. And now that's looking like a much better signal. You can see I'm not really in the red anymore. I'm seeing some yellow. That's okay. I'm all right with that, but I don't want to get those high peaks. And later on, I can make this sound a little bit louder. So this is what I'm going for in terms of a nice, clear signal. Now, one more thing you want to do is make sure you have a section that has a little bit of dead air. So I want to make sure I'm quiet for at least a few seconds. So something like this. And that gives me something that I will be able to identify as background noise in the next step. So don't just click record and just immediately start talking. Give yourself a few seconds, make sure you're quiet, you're not shuffling around in your chair or anything like that, or clicking things with the mouse. Just be quiet for a few seconds and then get started with your talking. And so when I press record, I just go for it and read through the entire script. And if I mess up, which I do quite often, I'll just go back to the beginning of the paragraph and try to reread it again. So I'm doing everything in one recording session instead of breaking it up into multiple parts. That's just easier for me to have it as one single file of all my raw audio that I can later go back to and edit. So when you're done, you're going to get something that looks like this. A bunch of different, very clear talking points and a bunch of parts where you are paused and not talking. So remember I told you about the part, I'm just pressing plus by the way here to zoom in, where you want to get that background noise. The very first thing I'll do is find a section with white noise, and I'm just going to marquee select it here like that. and then I'm going to go to Effects, Noise Reduction Restoration, Capture Noise Print. What that does is analyze this and basically copy that as background noise. And so now what I can do is I'm going to press the minus key up here to zoom out and see everything. I'm going to press Command A on Mac, that's Control A on Windows, and I'm going to go back to Effects and go to Noise Reduction Restoration, Noise Reduction Process. So for me, the default has always been fine. You don't need to do anything additional here. Just click Apply. It goes through this process. It's going to take a few seconds, but once it does that, it's going to remove that sound. And this is a small step, but it helps your audio seem a little bit clearer. Then I'm going to go through everything and start editing it. So I'll listen to a section. I'll say, let's zoom in again with the plus button. Okay, here's my intro. That sounded good. I'll listen through this. I will then marquee select and delete this part. Make sure I have a little gap for showing a different section here, and then it moves to the next one. And maybe I messed up in these next 2 takes, and this 3rd take is the one I want, and I'll delete. And so I'll keep repeating this process, listening and deleting the unused parts and tightening things up until I've got everything working and edited with the pacing and flow that I want. So before moving on, I'm going to want to save this as a copy. So I'm just going to go to File, Save As. I don't want to overwrite my original raw audio file just in case I need to go back to it to grab, some sentence or something like that I just deleted. So I'm just going to call this, VO2 and hit OK, and it's going to save that now as a copy. So with VO2 selected over here, I'm just going to click the New Multi-Track Session button up here, and that's going to bring it in, yeah, that's okay, to a new multi-track session. What's nice about this is now I can start to mix in different audio parts, including the background music, any sound effects, anything like that, as multiple tracks, and I can see everything in one place. Speaking of music, I would highly recommend checking out Audio Library on YouTube. They have tons of Creative Commons copyright-free music that you can use in the background of your videos as long as you copy and paste a little bit of copyright text in your video description. They have a ton of different styles. They are constantly adding things to it. I would say all my videos from the past year or so have been using this, and it is a great resource. All right, so here's a look at the mix that I did for this video. I've got my voiceover track up here. I've got my audio track over here, and I actually switched tracks in the middle of it. So all I did was, add another track, and then I kind of used these little sliders to crossfade one background music track in and out. And then if you've seen the video, there's that one part in the beginning where I say, "Call me crazy," and someone says, "You're crazy." I wanted that to sound a little bit different from the narrator's voice. So I made that its own section here, and I actually adjusted the pan here so it's gonna appear in your right ear a little bit more. And that also helps just differentiate a second voice from your main narrative track. So just a small trick there. I've been using the Essential Sound panel a lot in Audition. I think it helps you get a nice, clear, broadcast quality voice. So what I'll do is select my audio track, go over here to the Essential Sound panel, or it might show up in different sections depending on what your workspace layout is like. But you can always find it here under Window, Essential Sound. And then because this is dialogue, I'm gonna go to Dialogue, and I'm gonna set the preset to Balanced Male Voice. That's going to automatically kind of do some EQ and compression and stuff on my voice to make it sound as loud and clear and balanced as possible, particularly for my male voice. If I were a female, I would do the balanced female voice, and there's a few different effects here if you want, sound like you're on a telephone or radio or stuff like that. But this is great. This is a nice automatic step that leads to professional sounding audio within a matter of seconds. I actually did the same thing for the background music, so I selected it, I go to Music, and I'm going to select Balanced Background Music. That's going to make it a little bit quieter and balanced and not compete with the voice as much. I actually brought this down even more, probably -3 or something like that, just to make sure the voice was the strongest force in this piece, and the music is just kind of complementing that. As a finishing touch, I'm going to go to the end here, wait till I start talking. I'm probably going to, bring this in a little bit. I might make the volume come up a little bit at the end. I'll just add these little dots here to bring it up, because as I finish talking, I, want the audio to be a little bit louder when it comes to the credits. And then I'll do a little fade here by selecting the little fader square here and move it over so it fades out gracefully. And that looks pretty good. So now if I press minus, I will see my whole piece. Everything sounds and looks great. I'll always listen to it through it at least once to make sure, there's no parts where like the chorus in this music is really overpowering and competing with the audio, or there's a sound or frequency that I didn't hear that I need to edit out. But overall, this looks great. So what I'm going to do is go to File, Export, Multi-track Mixdown, Entire Session. I'll call that, whatever I want to, and hit OK. And that is going to save my file as all these things mixed together with the music, the audio, the person yelling "you're crazy," all of that into one single file. My next step was to take a sketchbook and just start sketching out ideas of how I was going to visualize some of these different parts. So you can see, there's this beginning part where I talk about Instasock as a, joke subscription service, the guy saying "you're crazy," a video game icon. Everything that's in the video, you can see where it started here. So I'm just going through the script and asking what's the best visual representation of the point I'm trying to make. And so, just try different things, sketching things out, really rough. This is something that only I understand, right? Like I know, like the penguin game thing, video game idea that happens halfway through the video. I just kind of sketched out an idea. I want to show a main game, a premium game, an indie game, Fortnite. And I actually was going to just show Fortnite, and then I decided, it'd be funnier if it was Penguin Battle Royale. So there's different things that you just sketch out rough ideas, and then they'll evolve as you start to put them together later in Photoshop. But for now, it's just kind of coming up with these basic ideas that will serve as the framework for the entire piece. Once this is done, you have a great inventory of all the assets you're going to have to create. So I know I need these icons for a bed and a toilet and all the other places you can play a Nintendo Switch. I know that I need these different icons for music and movies and books. I need to make up these fake logos for video subscription services. This basically becomes my Bible. This is what I'm going to have to use as my guide in creating all of these assets for the final piece. And now you're ready to move on into creating your narrator character. So in this case, I wanted to be a kind of flat cartoon version of myself, and I did it in Photoshop. You can use Illustrator as well. Either AI or PSD files work just as well. I always say just go with whatever feels comfortable to you. This character has a lot of complexity to him, but I'm going to try to break him down into the most simple components of how I started to build him as I was creating him in Photoshop. The first thing you'll notice is that he doesn't have a body, right? He kind of has the top part of his torso, and I knew that I didn't need to show him walking or having his legs or anything like that, so I just kind of cut him off right here, but I left myself enough room to have the arms coming down. So most of the time when you see him, right, he's off of the screen like this. So you're never really going to see the rest of his body. You just see his arms kind of rise up, and that's it. So that's why I built him like this. So knowing how much of your character you're going to see. If your character is walking in from the side or whatever, you will have to build out the rest of them. But for this, for kind of more of a just talking head style video, all I really needed was the upper part of the torso, and that was enough. Okay, let's start with the basics. Here I have a new file that is a size of 2500 by 2500 pixels at 72. That is big enough for what I was going for, a 1920 by 1080 video. Typically, you don't want to go too high in size, particularly for a Photoshop raster file, because the bigger it is, the bigger file size, the slower processing the character animator will have. But this looks pretty good to me, so I'll hit OK. When you start out, you're going to have one basic, background layer. I am going to just click the group icon 3 times, call the first group plus whatever my character's name is. I'm going to call the second group head, and I'm going to call the third group body. And then I will select both the head and body and drag them in to my main group. So that is the basic character animator structure. 99% of characters I create, this is the structure that I'm going to start with. And then I'll just continually add parts and elements to my character. So at this stage, I'm not really worried about naming things correctly for Character Animator. We know that Character Animator looks for certain things like left pupil, right eyeball, left eyebrow, mouth shape, all of that stuff. But at this early stage, I don't really care about that. All I'm doing is making sure I have as many parts and layers as possible. So I don't want the ears and the background of the head to all be one layer together, because if I want those ears to move independently, I need them to be their own parts. So basic idea is, no matter how you draw or what style you're using, you just want to build your character out with as many parts as possible. So building out this character, I used two main methods of illustration. Number one, I was using the shape tool, which is just this little circle or rectangle thing down here. Let's use like the ellipse tool here. And I just would drag it out to create a circle or an oval or different shapes like that. And then I would select the fill, whatever color I wanted it to be, and move that into position. A lot of this character is just simple circles and triangles and shapes and stuff like that. For anything with a standard shape, what I would do is make a new layer, go to the pen tool, make sure it was set to shape and not path, and then I would draw it. So like for the nose, I would, do this, click, click, and click like that. Now by default, mine has a stroke. I'm going to remove that, change that to 0, and instead change the fill color to something else. So this is what I did for, the eyebrows, for the hair, all of that stuff. All I did was, again, select the pen tool, and then for the eyebrow, I might, click here, maybe click and drag to give it a little bit of a curve, and then click again to stop it like that. And then you can always select it. I right click and select it, but if you have auto select, it'll just automatically happen when you select the layer here. And then if you click show transform controls, that's going to show these little things on the edges, which you can drag to resize things as need be, and then you can move them and place them wherever you want. Layer order is important, right? So right now this is showing up behind the head, and I don't want that. I would want this to show up in front. So make sure your layer order is as you would want it. I've said this before in other videos, but having a great mouth set is an essential part of a character, and this is not something you want to create from scratch for every character. I have a standard mouth set that I've been using for a lot of my characters, and so it's, here, this is its own Photoshop file. I've got all my main mouths here, and then I've got these different, single expression mouths that I didn't end up using for this particular one, and then my alternative, my sad mouths. So you'll notice in the piece that the character will sometimes, instead of being happy and talking with an upward turned mouth, they will instead start to get sad and or concerned and show a different style of mouth, upside down. And this is just a trigger, and all you want to do when setting this up is to have your main mouth group and then some alternatives mouth group as well. So I've got this separate PSD file, or you could take this from any other example puppet that you like their mouth shapes or mouth groups from. I'm going to make sure over here at the bottom of my toolbar, if I click this, I'm going to go to standard screen mode. That's going to allow me to see these different tabs, any other documents that I have open. And what I want to do is drag this group. This group is called Talk Contents. It's kind of just a main container for all my different mouth groups. And I'm just going to drag this all the way over here into my Dave4.psd file and let go, and it's going to show up. Now it's behind the skin, but I'm going to bring it and it's going to show up right there. Now that's way too big, so again I'm going to do show transform controls and just kind of resize it here so it looks a little bit better. And once that looks good, I'm going to move it back in place, and there we go. So again, once you have a mouth set that you feel happy with, that's what you should stick with, and just keep that as a file that's around, so in case you need it for multiple characters, it's there and ready for you to use. So once you're done with the basic look of your character, now you can start organizing and naming things the correct way. So for example, I started to put all of his hair groups together. So his right side hair is actually, 5 or 6 different layers, 7 different layers of hair. And because I wanted these all to work with one physics behavior, I wanted to put them all in one group. Now, if you're not using physics, don't worry about it. You don't have to organize it like this, but if you want the hair to kind of flop and move around, I would keep things in distinct groups and parts, so you will be able to manipulate them as a whole. I did the same thing with the left side of the hair over here as well. So inside Character Animator, we have all these great template example puppets, and you really should use these as a guideline of how to name and organize things. So when I'm dealing with the head, if I need a reference, the best one to go to is blank face over here. Because I'm in Photoshop, I'm just going to click the image or Photoshop. Both of them will open up the puppet in Character Animator and the Photoshop file. So I can see here exactly how everything is structured, right? Plus left eyebrow is his, left eyebrow. And again, that's the left side of the character, not the left side of the screen. Plus right eyebrow. Again, we add the pluses in front of things if we want them to move on their own, basically be independent and move without warping or pulling on anything else. Then I'll make the eye group, and inside the eye you want your blink state, which is going to show up when your character is blinking. When you are blinking your eyes in the webcam, that's what you want to show up, and that will also make anything else in this group disappear, which is your plus left pupil and your left eyeball. So these components make up the eye. We see a lot of issues with people not doing the eyes correctly. This is the really basic structure. You want a group called left eye or right eye. You want left blink plus left pupil plus left eyeball, and then you want to do the exact same thing for your right eye. If you follow this structure, you will not run into any problems. This is exactly how it should be. In fact, if you like these eyes, you can just drag them, select them, and drag them into your composition and have them show up instead of whatever eyes you've created. Or you can use that as a guide and then delete it once you're done. Now this character is a little bit different because instead of the blink, he's got a group called lids. And lids includes a bunch of different things. It includes a group called blink, which is actually a multi-frame sequence of him blinking his eye and completely closing it. We'll get to that in a little bit. And then different eye states. So he's got kind of this half eyelid thing, an impressed eye, and then a happy eye. And these are basically going to be triggered eye expressions. So later on, when I want my character to feel like he's happy, I'm going to trigger the happy eyes. Or when I feel like he's kind of impressed or knows what he's talking about, I'm going to do or thinks he knows what he's talking about, that is, I'm going to trigger the impressed eyes. I think having a bunch of these different lid expressions is a great way, or lid triggers I should say, is a great way to add some extra expressiveness to your character. So for any character I make, I will have at least something like this where they're kind of in their own group, and I kind of group them with the blinks in this case because I don't want I want them all happening over top of my pupil and eyeball. I still want to see, in the case of the half eyeball or the half eyelid, I still want to be able to see my pupil moving behind it. I don't want it to completely take over it. And so that's why I have it as its own separate group up here. But you can try and experiment with a few different structure things and see what works best for your character. I say the only other thing I want to worry about right now is making certain parts independent. So for example, I know with this character, I want to have a certain sense of parallax to him. So I want a lot of these elements to move on their own. For example, the ear. When the ear moves, and it's just this circle that's kind of hidden behind his head, but I don't want that pulling on the rest of his skin. So I'm going to call that plus left ear. Or same thing with his nose, I'm going to call that plus nose. Now you can take this too far and go independent overload, where if everything is moving independent, you're going to lose some character, you're going to lose some fluidity or dynamics to the character because everything is moving on its own and there's nothing kind of influencing each other's animation. So I would say, use with caution, experiment, but for me, when I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking, which parts do I want to move on their own independently without influencing or pulling or pushing or warping any other artwork. Particularly for the hair, I knew that each of these strands I want to add some physics to. So physics only works when you have these independent parts. So I wanted to make sure every single strand of hair is a plus. So I did plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, all the way down here to make sure each of those were their own independent strands. I guess the bottom line that I would say for the head is, you can have as many things inside your head group as you want, but the basic parts you need really are the eye groups and your mouth group. The eyebrows are nice to have as well, but everything else is kind of extra, stuff on top of that foundation. So my feeling is if you've got the eyes and the mouth working great, everything else is just built on top of that. And I would stress, particularly if this is one of your first characters you're creating, start simple. Don't feel like you have to do a full head turn animation. Don't feel like you have to have all this physics enabled hair strands, I keep it simple and you'll learn as you go. I mean, it's really building off of this eye and mouth foundation, and everything else, once you've got that down, you'll continue to learn and grow as you create more and more puppets. Or you can continue to evolve one puppet. So, I could make this puppet and then add a hat to him, or add glasses, or add, special new triggered mouths or eyelid expressions. You can keep growing and building a single puppet to continually make it more complex, more expressive, more interesting. But the biggest takeaway is don't go overly complex. Keep things simple, keep things easy, keep things how you know them in Photoshop or Illustrator. Don't feel like you have to learn 100 new things just to get a character working. I mean, look at this. This is simple stuff. This is a circle, this is a triangle, this is, really basic pen tool 101 type stuff. I'm not doing crazy, complicated illustration stuff here. It's really simple, basic shapes. All right, so we're done with the head. Let me twirl that up and let's move on into the body. All it is a torso layer that is sandwiched between two arms. And really it's the same arm that I just duplicated and put on the other side. Now, the only difference here is that this left arm, for this character, his left arm, there are no different hand positions. It's always going to be this single four-fingered hand that shows up. But for the right arm, I do want it to switch between a point and an open hand. And so if you want to swap between those two, you'll need a swap set trigger. And the way that I did that was just make inside the arms group, I've got my basic arm here. If I remove the torso for a second, you'll be able to see it a little bit better. So we've got this basic arm shape, and then inside that, I've got the hand group that has the open and the point as its two alternating hands. And I could add more. I could add a thumbs up, a peace sign, whatever to this. But at least in this case, from this character, I only had two separate positions. So when I'm happy with my character, I'm going to save it and then move over to Character Animator to start rigging and animating it. All right, we've finally made it into Adobe Character Animator. So let's go over to New Project. We want to start fresh, and let's call this something like Video Games, and we'll click Save. And now that's going to create a new blank project. And right now, all it is me talking to the webcam. Not very interesting. So let's start to add our character. I'm gonna go over to the project panel over here, and I'm going to double click in the blank space, which is going to bring up my file browser. You can also do this by going to File, Import. It's going to do the exact same thing. So here in my beautifully organized files, I'm going to find that file that I was working on, which is Dave4PSD, very easy to find, and I'm going to click Import. That is going to bring in the artwork and turn it into a puppet. And you see we get it over here with a nice little puppet icon. If I double click on this over here, I'm going to see my character show up in rig mode. This is kind of the X-ray view of the character. This is where I'm putting everything together to teach Character Animator how I want things to animate. And there's some extra steps we'll do here in the future, but for now, let's add it to a scene and see, without doing anything extra, what he's going to look like. So with my puppet selected, I'm gonna go down here in the bottom left corner of the project panel and click Add to New Scene, the little clapboard icon. And what that does is bring my character into a scene like this. Now you'll notice I immediately double clicked my face, or you can click Set Rest Pose. That's going to add the tracking dots to your face like that. And I can immediately see that this character is too big for my current scene size. So the very first thing I'm going to do is click once on the scene, and that's going to bring up the scene properties over here on the right. And so I remember that my character was about 2500 by 2500 pixels, so I'm gonna change the width and height to exactly that. When you're dealing with a character that you're gonna eventually dynamic link into After Effects or Premiere or other places, you want to give it enough buffer room so things won't get cut off. If my width, let's say my height was instead like 1800 or something like that, the head is gonna get cut off. If I dynamic linked this into After Effects, right now it would show him with his head, half of his head missing. So you wanna make sure that you've got enough space around the character so when you do link it eventually, none of your artwork is going to get cut off. So by default, I can tell he's looking pretty good. I mean, his pupils are moving around, his eyebrows are going up and down. The mouth is disappearing every once in a while, and that's because I think I know why. There's some cycle layers mouths that I haven't added a behavior to, so they're showing up as invisible, but we'll get to that in a second. But as I move my head around, he's moving, his whole body and torso is moving. Again, we'll fix that, but overall, things are looking pretty good. They're looking pretty nice. So I think we're off to a good start, but let's go back to rig mode and start to fix some of the issues that we're seeing here. So every character is gonna be a little bit different, right? And this is a troubleshooting, trial and error part of things, right? So your puppet's head might be falling off. The pupils might be coming out of the eyeballs. Your eyebrows might be coming completely off your head. You're gonna have every puppet and body type is gonna be slightly different, and you may run into different issues depending on how your mouth looks, how your eyes look, how all your different parts are together. But I'm gonna focus on just some basic building blocks that I almost always do for any character that I've got here. So the first thing I'm going to do is, this is the anchor point for the head, and I don't want the head to rotate from the middle of it. I actually want it to rotate by the neck. So I'm going to make sure my selection tool is active here down at the bottom in my tool tray. I'm just going to drag the origin from wherever it is down to the bottom. This is going to make your head pivot a little bit better and nicer, and it's just a first step that I almost always take. Next, with the body. In this case, he's just half of a torso. If I had shoes, it would be a different story, but I want this part to be stuck and fixed to the ground. The way I do this normally is through the stick tool and tagging it as fixed. So I'm gonna go over this little bracket thing down here called the stick tool. I'm gonna make sure my body group is selected. That's everything in here with the arms and the torso and everything. And I'm going to just draw and drag a stick across the bottom here. And then I'm going to go over to the tags panel and tag that as fixed. Now you could also do this with the little fixed pin tool, which is going to add a bunch of different pins, but I find that can sometimes leave gaps and have things bend between that. So I find it's a little bit safer if you do the stick and keep that fixed. That tends to work a little bit better. All right, so let's move on to the arms. Now remember, I added a plus in front of each of the arms, and when you add a plus in the Photoshop, in the file, the layer name, it's going to add this little crown icon in the front. So all these crown icons, all that means is that I added a plus at the front of the name in Photoshop or Illustrator, and it will automatically add this as a sign of independence. Now I can take this away if I wanted to, but for these particular parts, I do want them to remain independent. So let's select one of my arms, the left arm here, and I see that it's got a nice little origin, it's dotted line origin here, but it also has this green line attaching it to the torso. Why is it doing that? Well, there's several reasons. Number one, when you have it selected and you go to attach to, it's going to say, what is it attached to? What is this independent arm attaching to? In this case, it's auto, and 9 times out of 10, that is actually 99 times out of 100, that is what you want. If it's something else here, or you're not seeing the green line, that probably means that you updated old artwork or something like that, and Character Animator hasn't quite synced up yet. So just switch this to auto. You got to make sure that it's an independent group over here and select that as auto. You also want to make sure that this tool is highlighted down here, Show Mesh Outline and Auto Handles, and that will allow you to see the green line. But all I'm going to do is drag the origin of the arm, because I don't want it to rotate where the elbow is. I actually want it to rotate where the shoulder is. And you'll notice as soon as I roll over dependent artwork, that's artwork that is not independent, I can attach it to that particular thing. So now the arm is going to rotate from the shoulder as opposed to the elbow. Let's do that for the other arm as well. It's already green. I know that it's set to attach to as auto, so I'm going to drag this up and make that the origin as well. So now to be able to drag the arms, I'm going to go down here to the dragger tool. I'm going to select that, the little compass looking thing, and I'm going to make a new dragger handle on top of the arm, on top of the hand actually, the other extreme basically. You always want your origin on one side and your draggable on the other side. And let's do that for the left arm as well. And then just to give things a little bit more structure, I'm going to draw some sticks. So I'm going to do this for where the bicep is, leave a little bit of room for the elbow, and drag some more over where the forearm is. Let's do the same thing for the right arm, drag where the bicep is, leave some room for the elbow, and drag again. I'm gonna do one more thing before I check out my progress, and that's I noticed that the mouth was disappearing every once in a while, and I've got a lot of different mouth things that I'll figure out later, but for this mouth set, several of the mouths are actually multi-frame sequences. So is actually a 2-frame sequence of the mouth kind of opening. This helps give your mouth a little bit more of a fluid lip sync quality. So what I'm gonna do is select all 3 of these that are multi-frame sequences. In this case, it's and woo, and I'm just holding down the command key on Mac or control on Windows to be able to select them all. And then I'm going to go down here to behaviors, click the plus, and go to cycle layers. And this just means it's gonna, when these things are triggered, when Character Animator hears an ah shape or an shape or a woo shape, it's going to play through these various sequences that are here, these 2-frame or 3-frame sequences. These are just, sequential layers. So yes, I want it to start when triggered. I want it to move top to bottom, move 1 frame. I want it to cycle once. I do want it to hold on the last layer. So if I hold a woo sound or an sound, I want it to hold on that last frame instead of going back to another Vizime. And then I don't want cycle finish. I want it to stop immediately. That's going to make the lip sync feel a little bit more synced up. If you have it let cycle finish, there's the chance that you're already on to another sound while the animation is still playing. So you want to make sure that's set to stop immediately. Okay, with that, I think I've solved a lot of the basic problems that my character had. So let's go back to record mode and let's see how things are looking. So already I can tell his torso is stuck. It's not moving and flopping all over the place, which is great. The mouth is not disappearing anymore, so it looks like I fixed that problem. And the arms I can drag and move around and make some gestures with. So it looks like those basic problems got solved. Also, the head is rotating from that origin point, that origin handle as well. So the next step I'm going to tackle is triggers. Triggers are one of the most critical parts of any character. It's going to add a lot of additional expressiveness to them. So I'm going to change the hands to be able to do that point and the open hand. I'm going to change the mouths to be able to do the sad mouth set. I'm going to change the eyelids to be able to trigger to the happy and impressed and half eyelid open eyes. So back in rig mode, let's start with something simple. Let's start with the hand swap set. So I've got my 2 hands in here, point and open. I'm just going to drag my group over into my triggers panel over here, and I see create trigger or create swap set. I want this to be a swap set. And what I mean by swap set is I only want one of these to show up at a time. So I'm just going to let go, and that's going to create my swap set. And that's all there is to it. I'm going to change a few things. I want the open hand to be the default, so I'm going to click the little icon next to that, and whatever icon is filled in is basically the first one that's going to show up. So in this case, my open hand is the one I want to show up first, and then the point hand, let's say I want that to show up when I press the 1 key. So I'm going to press 1 there, I'm going to enter a 1 in the text field there, and so now when I press 1, I know point is going to show up instead of open, and open is going to hide. And when I let go of 1, then open is going to show instead, because that's the default. I usually like to do a latch. I'm going to click a latch down here, and that just means I have to click 1 once instead of holding it down for the trigger to work. I find latch triggers are a little bit easier to kind of remember and not do finger gymnastics when you're trying to hold down 3 or 4 different triggers. It feels just a little bit more user-friendly to me. Let's take that same concept with the mouth. So I've got my main mouth group here. I've got a singles mouth group, which is like a smile, a frown, and a surprised look. And then my alternative, this is my sad mouth group, where the mouths are upside down and looking a little bit more sad. I just noticed I probably have to add cycle layers to these 3, so I'll do the exact same thing I just did before, where I'm going to select them all, add cycle layers, hold on last layer, stop immediately, and that should work. Now, I want this alternate mouth group to also read as a mouth. So what I need to do is go over here and tag it as a mouth in the mouth panel. That's going to allow it to read as a lip sync mouth. If I don't do that step, it's not going to understand that it's going to be used for lip sync. The lip sync behavior is specifically looking for your mouth. And by the way, when I talk about the lip sync behavior, all your main behaviors for your character are up here at the top. You might not know that you can select this, but you can. And you'll see this has a little, this is the name of your puppet, and a little 8 is next to it. And that 8 means this character has 8 behaviors that are pre-added to it over here. So whenever you import a Photoshop or Illustrator file, it is going to automatically add these behaviors to the character. And we add these because these are basic behaviors that almost every character is going to want. You want your eyes to move around. You want to be able to drag the hands. You want the face to move. All of these different things are automatically added. But if you don't want something, you can always select it here with the little menu icon, remove the behavior, and it will take it away. So I'm going to create a swap set with talk contents, but I'm going to do it a little bit differently. I'm going to click the plus icon down here, create swap set, and I'm going to press enter and rename this to mouths. Now what I'm going to do is first bring in my default mouth, and drag that in. And I want that to be my default, so I'm gonna click the little default icon to make sure that's the one that's selected. Then I've got my 3 single mouths, my smile, surprised, and frown. I'm just gonna drag all 3 of those into the mouths swap set, and they will all show up as separate things. The reason I'm doing this is because if I'm smiling, I don't also want my lip sync mouth to show up behind it or, in place of it. I want the smile to kind of be take over. So let's set a few different keys for this. Let's do 2 for the smile, 3 for surprise, and 4 for frown, and then I'm going to select all of these and select them as latch as my preferred triggering methods, but your mileage may vary. And then finally, let's take that alternative mouse group. I'm going to drag that in here again to my mouse swap set. We'll set that to a 5 key and also latch, and let's just rename that by hitting enter and calling that sad. All right, so going back to record mode, let's see if everything is working as expected. So the first one was I did the hand swap. I'm only seeing 1 hand right now. If I press 1, it's going to change to the point, and if I press it again, it's gonna go back to the hand. So that seems to be working. Let's try the different mouth shapes. I did 2 for a frowning mouth, and that's working, and you'll notice my lip sync is not overriding that, so it's working just as I want to. If I press 3, it's gonna do the surprised mouth. 4 is a smile, and 5 is going to do my sad mouth set. So now he's talking and he's sad about something, and now he's happy again, and now he's sad, and now he's happy. So I can, do a bunch of these and try different expressions, and my character is starting to come to life a little bit more. He's got a little bit of additional emotion. Next up, we'll move on to the eyes. Remember, we had all these different eyelid positions and blinks and whatnot. The blinks, if you'll remember, are a multi-frame sequence. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to select these, go over to my behaviors, and add the cycle layers behavior. And it'll be pretty similar to the mouth, except I do want them to forward and reverse. I do want the eyes to be able to close and then open back again. And then hold on last layer. In case I hold a blink, I want my eyes to remain closed. And let cycle finish is correct. If it stopped immediately, it would stop mid-blink, and that could look kind of weird. So these feel like the correct settings for the blink states. All right, so normally I would just drag in my lids group, over create swap set, and here's happy. Let's do that with 7, and let's do impressed as 8, and half as 9. Now, notice that I only dragged in the right eyes groups, but what I can actually do is combine these and do the left eye as well. So the happy layer for the left eye, I'm going to drag that over top of the happy trigger I've got here. And you'll notice as soon as I do that, I've got my 2 layers showing up down here. My left eyelid's happy and my right eyelid's happy. So both of these layers, actually as many layers as you want, I could select all of these and drag them over top of here, and my layers list is gonna be really, really long. That means all those things are gonna be disappearing by default, but when I press this trigger, they'll all appear. That is not what I want, so I'm gonna undo that, but you get the basic idea. Triggers can have as many layers, groups, whatever, added to them. Let's do the same thing for impressed. I'm going to drag the impressed layer over here, and with half, I'm going to do half. And finally, for the blink, I'm going to do the left blink as well. Now, here's a problem. The blinks, because they're the default, if I just triggered them just like this, look what's going to happen if I go to record mode. My character's eyes are constantly closed. They're in this default triggered state, right, where they're constantly closed. And that's because the default is seen as the first thing that plays. And so in this case, the blink is the first thing that's triggered. So there's a few ways I could fix this. I could go back into Photoshop, and instead of calling this right blink, call this container or something like that, and then put the right blink group inside of it. That way it wouldn't trigger exactly as we're seeing right here. But you know what? For this character, I want to keep things easy, and it's not a big deal if his blink is showing up at the same time as these other things, because for the most part, these are kind of covering the rest of his eyes. So what I'm going to do is just delete this from the swap set, and this swap set I'm not going to add a default to. So the default is just going to be the open eyes without anything, and then if I press 7, 8, or 9, which I'm going to latch here, those will show up instead. So let's test this out. I'm going to try to blink, and my character blinks, and you'll see I do that 3-frame sequence. If I hold my eyes closed, he's going to keep his eyes closed. At least I think he is. I can't see the screen. Hopefully he is. And then if I press, 7, he'll do the happy eyes, and 8, he'll do the impressed eyes, and 9, he'll do the half eyes. Now, because of the way I set it up, I can blink in this state, and so you will see the half eyes with the blink at the same time, but I think that looks okay, and that's an easy problem to fix later on if I needed to edit out a blink or something like that. Next, let's start to tackle that hair. So if you remember correctly, I had my right side and all my little individual independent strands of hair here, and my left side as well. So what I want to do for each of these strands is drag the origin to where the root of the hair is, where it would basically attach to the head, and then come down here and get the dangle tool, which is going to automatically create a dangle tagged handle, and put it on the end, the tip of the hair, somewhere around there like that. And I'm just going to go through this process for every single strand of hair. I might add some variety too, because I don't want each hair piece to move exactly the same, so I might move the dangle more on the tip for this one, and then a little bit further back for another strand of hair, just to add a little bit more variety so the hair isn't completely moving in the exact same direction. Okay, so I finished that. I've got all my different hair strands. Let's go to record mode and see how this is looking by default. Well, he's looking a little emo there with the hair kind of going in front. And that's because physics right now, let's go into the physics behavior and see why this is happening. Well, it's because gravity is going straight down as it normally does, and that is affecting these long strands of hair. They are attaching at the root, and then they're coming down. Now, that's a pretty cool look. Like, that's nice. I could go for that, but I think I want the hair to be a little bit stiffer. And so I could play around with gravity direction, right? I could change this to make the hair go up a little bit more, and that works pretty well, but then that's also going to affect the hair on the other side. So instead of one physics behavior that's kind of a global setting, I think I want more control over my hair. I want the longer strands on the one side to move slightly differently than the smaller strands on the other side. So I'm going to go back to rig mode and see if I can fix this. So when I go up to my global behaviors here, I'm actually going to remove physics by clicking the little menu icon here and saying remove behavior, and that's going to remove my global behavior for physics, and instead I'm going to add it by selecting right side and left side simultaneously, go down to behaviors, and add physics there. This is going to add a physics behavior to each of them. You see this little brick icon with a little gear inside it? That means that a behavior has been added to it, just like I did with the cycle layers for the blink and in a few other places. So when I come back to record mode, things are generally looking the same. The hair is still kind of flopped over. I'm gonna change my background to white actually, just by clicking this little color down here. And this doesn't really matter. You can click through this and it's a bunch of different things. This is an alpha layer, it's transparent. It really doesn't matter. It's not gonna show up in your final piece. It's just for your own clarification. Okay, so I've got my hair still kind of flopping around here, but what I'm going to do is go into the character's right side, not the right side of the screen, but his right side is the longer hair. So what I'm going to do is twirl that open, and I'm just going to change the gravity direction so it's up a little bit more. Now, that's still looking a little too floppy, so I'm going to go into my dangle parameter too, my dangle settings here, and I'm going to change the stiffness up a little bit. So let's try like 125%. And that looks a little bit better to me. That doesn't have too much sway. Now I can go super crazy, right? I could do 1 or 0, and that's gonna be, 0 gravity crazy hair. I don't want that. Or I can do super hairspray and make it, 200%, and then it's really stiff. It's not gonna move. But play around with this and see what works best for your style. So 125 is looking good for what I want, and the little movements that my character does, that's gonna give it a nice amount of bounce. Let's do the same thing for the left side. In general, that's looking pretty good. I'm gonna maybe move it over a little bit, kind of in the direction that the hair is going, and I'll probably do the same thing, a stiffness of about 125. And now that I've set those parameters, this is not something I have to worry about anymore. It's just what we call a secondary animation. So it's just automatically adding that physics aspect to the hair as I move my head around, and I don't have to do any additional details or parameter changes or recording or anything like that. It just automatically happens. And that's great. Being able to add these little dynamic elements to your character can really help bring them to life and make the movement feel a little less stiff and more alive, particularly for something like the hair. If you've been making puppets for a while and want to add a little bit of extra dimension and control to your characters, I would point you to two 2 additional videos to check out. I'm not going to just reiterate what I've said in other videos here because number 1, this is already running pretty long, but number 2, these are more advanced concepts that I think are better served through a more dedicated video. So the first video I would point you to is the Arm IK tutorial. You'll notice in this character now I've tagged the shoulders, and in each of the arms I've got elbows and wrist tagged as well. And adding Arm IK is just going to give me more control over how the arms bend. So if you find your elbows are bending the wrong way or your arms are looking wonky, I would definitely check out that tutorial. Secondly, you probably noticed that the character had some really nice parallax going on, some shadows and some texturing. I've got those hidden right now, but if I turn those on, you'll start to see this nice watercolor texture that's happening here. This other texture in his body, these are just adding some extra elements to help bring him a little bit more to life. So if you're interested in learning more about this kind of parallax effect as I'm moving the head and the shadow is moving and the eyes and the ears and all of that stuff are moving simultaneously, as well as this watercolor overlay texturing, check out the advanced rigging tutorial for the sample character Lita. The exact same principles that are covered there apply to this character. All right, so now that our narrator character is looking great and working exactly like we want him or her to, we can move on to the recording process. Character Animator is a little different in how it records. If you've used Adobe Animate or After Effects or other programs before, you may be used to more of keyframe style recording where you set one pose and then you keyframe and ease into another pose. Character Animator instead is all about acting and performing. So it's more about, think of it as like if you were recording a band. You've got your drums, you've got your bass, you've got the vocals, all of that stuff. Well, with Character Animator, you've got the lip sync, the eyes, the head movements, the triggers. All of these different things are essentially multiple components that when you put them all together, they create a compelling animated performance. And everything starts with the script and the words and the voiceover. So the first thing I'm going to want to do with any animated performance is bring in my initial voiceover. So an important thing about bringing in voiceover for Character Animator recordings. Character Animator Lip Sync works best with raw microphone recorded audio, not stuff that you've mastered or processed or mixed or anything like that. You're going to get the best results from just raw microphone audio. So because of the way we set up our file in Audition, if you can remember that early in the tutorial, I think that was like 5 hours ago, when we talked about, setting up your file and then you bring it into a multi-track master session, and then we're adding the effects over top of that. Now, the reason we did that is because we still have that raw audio file that we can use for the best lip sync quality. So let's find that lip sync file. I'm going to go over to my project panel and I'm going to double click in the blank area. And again, I can always go to File, Import instead. But I'm going to find that voiceover. I have done a horrible job of naming things over here, master, final, lip sync, all this stuff. But I believe lip sync final is the one I want. So let's just don't follow my lead there. Organize your files a little bit better than me. But let's click Import. And now we have this audio file that is also showing up in our project panel. So all I'm going to do is drag this into my scene over here, just into the canvas over here, and you'll see the audio shows up down here at the bottom. One small thing I always do is drag my audio over just slightly, so it gives me a little extra time at the beginning in case I'm getting my character ready, or as the physics simulation is starting or the arms are getting in place. You want to give yourself a little buffer room so you don't have to start exactly at 000. You have a few seconds to kind of get started. So now that we've got this voiceover file, we are going to create the lip sync from it. I'm going to select my character down here, and I'm going to disarm all of the behaviors except for lip sync. The shortcut to do that, well, you could just click, all these red dots and take forever, but you can also hold down Command on Mac or Control on Windows and click any red dot, and that's going to turn them all on or all off simultaneously. So as I was saying, I only want to do lip sync, so let's arm lip sync, and you'll notice right now, it's not doing my eyes, it's not doing my head, it's not doing drag or anything like that. It's only focused on the lip sync, and that's because that is the only thing that's armed. Whenever you see a red dot, it means it's ready for recording. Think of red as ready. It's ready to record. And in the case of a pre-recorded audio track, all I'm going to do is go to Timeline, compute lip sync from scene audio, and that's going to go through the process of analyzing that audio track and giving me all of the individual mouth shapes as if I were recording it live. So this is the process I am constantly using when I record an audio track in Audition. I bring that raw audio in, I add it to my scene, and I do timeline compute lip sync from scene audio. So you can see that added a new track in my timeline called Lip Sync Audio Input and Visemes. Visemes are basically the visual mouth shapes that your character has, those things that were in your mouth group in the Photoshop file. So I can actually disarm lip sync, turn the microphone off. I don't need to add anything else. My lip sync is good. I don't need to pollute it with any other information. And let's zoom in. I'm just going to press the plus key here to look a little closer, and you'll see as I'm kind of dragging through here, every shape, every mouth shape is showing up down here, down below. And so this is great. I can see exactly, when I say a particular word. So in a later step, we're going to do some further editing of the lip sync track and make sure everything is looking exactly right and all the mouth shapes are lining up as you would want. But for now, this is what I want, because now I can base all my next steps of animation off of this audio track, because now I can tell when the character is happy, when they're sad, what they're saying at any moment, when they need to gesture like this with their hands. So the talk track is the perfect starting point for your animation, and that's why you want to do that as your first step. So with the lip sync done, I can now move on to whatever other aspect I want. And that could be, dragging the arms around. That could be the eye gaze. That could be face movements. That could be triggers, pressing the different buttons to make different things happen. But you could do all of these at the same time, right? I have these all armed and I press the record button and I can record my performance. For me, I find that I can't keep track of multiple things in my head at the same time. I feel like I get better results when I focus on one element at a time. So for me, I'm going to start with eye gaze. So just focus on eye gaze, I'm going to disarm the other elements, and now you'll notice the only thing that's moving around are the character's pupils. Now by default, eye gaze is set to camera input, and that's the reason why it's showing my webcam pupil movement is dictating where the pupils are going for the character. But for recorded pieces, that's great for live stuff, but for me personally, for recorded pieces, I want an extra degree of control, and so I will usually disarm camera input and do keyboard input instead. And now when I press the arrow keys, it's going to allow me more precise control over where those pupils are going. Now I also have, if your pupils are like coming out of your eyeball or they feel too subtle, you do have control in the strength parameters down here. So since I have keyboard strength, I'm using the keyboard, I could bring this down, really slightly to 18, and then the pupil movements are going to be really subtle. You can't even really tell they're moving. Or I could bring it really far up, and now the pupils are going to go completely out of the eyeballs. So you don't want that. For me, I went with 75%, which is not quite to the edge of the eyeballs, but it gives it enough movement that it feels like it's going to add some life to them. Now, when I'm thinking of an eye gaze performance, I'm mixing a few elements. Number one, there's a certain degree of randomness, right? As we're talking, we're not just staring blankly at the, the viewer. We want to kind of dart our eyes to the side and then maybe down and up and, do a few things like this. So just adding a little variety, making it feel, making the eyes not feel lifeless and staring blankly. The second thing that I'll mix with it is certain phrases. So I might say something that the character feels a little introspective about, right? So he's kind of looking up into the corner and thinking about something. Or maybe he's making a hand motion and he wants to look down at his hands. As you're listening to your talk track, are there certain phrases where your character might want to be looking in a specific direction? And that includes, as you're thinking about your composition later on in After Effects, okay, I know I'm gonna have this big chart in the corner over here, or I know I'm gonna have these things floating around my character's head. So you can address those and connect the character to those elements by making him stare at where you think they will go. Now, this is always something you can go back and fix later on, so as you're compositing things in After Effects, if he's looking the wrong way or whatever, don't worry too much about it, but if you have some idea of where your character is going to be and where those graphical elements are going to be, connecting them with the pupils is a really strong technique. A really handy tool that helps you make really precise recordings is slow motion recording. So this is something I'm using all the time. So next to the red record icon here, I've got playback speed. If I click this little number here, I see playback speed, and I also see recording speed. 3/4 recording speed, 0.75x, that is what I normally do. This allows me to hear things when I'm recording slightly slower, playing at 3/4 speed. And that means I have a little bit more time to react and do things and move around, as opposed to doing it at full speed when everything, if I'm doing it and I'm reacting to things, it might feel a little bit late in all my deliveries. So when I hear someone say he's happy, and then a second later I'm like, oh yeah, I need to be happy, and I press the happy trigger or something like that, it's a lot easier when things are moving slower. And if you go too slow, they're going to talk like this, and you can't understand anything they're saying. So I prefer, for me, the sweet spot is that 0.75x, because that's going to get it a little bit slower than normal, but not too slow that you can't understand what's going on. So let's just give this a try. So I've got eye gaze, I'm ready. I'm at this beginning of my timeline, and I will hit record. A little countdown will happen, and we will start to record. So my normal workflow with this sort of thing is I just keep on recording until I mess up, right? So I'm looking around, and then maybe sometimes I might do, kind of a eye jitter, and it doesn't, look exactly like I want. So in that case, I'll stop. I'll either click the record button or press the space bar as a shortcut. And I will just kind of drag back a couple of seconds and then press record again and start the process all over again. Now, this is not recording, it's not overwriting your previous performance. All it's doing is creating a second take. So you are just kind of, here's my second performance, here's my second try at things, and there's going to be some overlap there, right? So let's just stop this for now and show you exactly where that transition happens. So if I scroll back here, I can see here was my initial take, this take one down here, but then here, right around 12 seconds, is where I started my second take. Normally, when you are transitioning between one take and the next, you want to blend performances together. So here's my bottom one, and you see where it's kind of darkened here? That means something over top of it is taking over. So whatever's up here is kind of overpowering what's down there. But if I drag this little blend handle over here, you can see that changes. It's kind of mixing. Anywhere where there's a curve here, that means it's taking part of performance one and blending in performance two. And so it's a much more natural way to blend all your performances together and make it look like you got everything right the first time, when in fact it might be multiple performances strung out together. For me, my blends are usually pretty short, and honestly with this case, it looks like with the eye gaze, not much is happening. The eyes aren't moving at that particular part, so I don't even really need to blend in this case, but a lot of times with head movements, with arms, with some other things, we will see blending having a dramatic effect. Okay, so now let's say I've gone through that whole 5-minute performance and I've done my eye gaze. It's good to go. It looks great. I'm going to disarm that. I'm done with eye gaze, and I'm going to move on to another element. So let's try dragger now, moving the arms around. The way I set up dragger is I will first record a short pass of the arms being in a rest pose, and then I will add and blend other small gestures on top of that. I'll show you what I mean. So I'm going to go back to the beginning here. I'm going to make sure dragger is arms, and I'm going to put my arms in kind of a neutral rest position. Where do I want my arms kind of always starting from and going back and forth from during the the whole piece? So that looks pretty good. They're kind of off screen right here, but there's a little bit of bend to them, so I know they're going to be easy to move up and make certain gestures with. So that looks good. I'm just going to press record for a couple of seconds, keep them in place, and stop. And you'll notice that's going to do two different tracks here. Now, I didn't name my handles in the original rig mode, so you see it says handle parentheses, handle parentheses. If I wanted to change that, I can actually just double click on Dave here, and that's going to bring me into rig mode. And then let's find those draggable handles, right? So here, this handle, is currently just tagged as draggable and left wrist. But if I press enter, I can actually name that handle into something different. So this character, that's his left hand. So I'm just gonna type in left hand, click OK, and now in very tiny text down there, it says left hand. Let's do the same thing for the right arm. I'm gonna select the draggable because that's what's the dragger behavior is controlling. I'm gonna select that. It's also tagged as right wrist because I've got arm IK on this character, and I'm going to hit click enter, and we're going to call this right hand. So now we have those two things. So if I go back to record mode now, things are a little bit clearer. I can see that this track is my right hand and this track is my left hand. It just makes things a little easier as you're starting to manipulate and blend things in and out. So because I want these arm positions to remain stationary and fixed, all I'm gonna do is select both of these. I'm gonna press minus a few times so I'm zoomed out a little bit, and then I'm just gonna hover over the edge of them until I get this little arrow icon, and I'm just gonna drag all the way through the entire length of the piece. And that means my character's arms are gonna be stuck in that rest position for the entire duration of the timeline. Now I can start to play things back, listen to them, and think about how my character might be gesturing based off of what's being said. So I do a few techniques. I will do the arm up. I will do a gesture when I'm talking like this on certain words. I know with this hand, I have a little point that I'm going to do for a trigger later on. So sometimes I'll, raise the hand up and say, I know I'm going to do a point here. I'll worry about that later though. And then sometimes I also do where he's like, kind of scratching his head or putting it like this as he's thinking about something or he's embarrassed about something. So a few things like that. Normally, I am alternating between the arms. So if you watch the video, you'll notice a lot of times he's moving with his right hand and then he will switch over to his left hand for another gesture and then to the right. And this is just to add a little bit of diversity. All right, so let's take a look at how I would do my dragger overdubs, the little gestures that the character is doing. So let's go back to the front of the timeline. My character is armed, dragger is armed, slow motion recording speed, everything's looking good. So let's press record. He says, everything is becoming a subscription nowadays. So for that, I'm gonna just, everything is becoming a subscription nowadays. And bring that down and stop. Just like that. So I'm only recording for a few seconds, but I have this nice little gesture that my character is doing based off of the audio that I'm hearing. And then what I'm gonna do is add the blending. So if I did not add the blending, here's what it's going to look like. Let's go back, play this back. He's talking, he does this gesture. Now watch the hand. See how it just stopped right there and it kind of clinked into place? There's this jumpiness there. That's going to be off screen with this character because it's below the torso, so that's okay. But with this other arm, you would definitely see that happening. And just as a general rule, I try to blend all performances together. So instead, what I'm going to do is do a very, very small blend here at the beginning and end. Usually, it doesn't have to be very long. It can be, just 1/10 of a second or something like that. It can be very, very short to allow it to blend and look a little smoother. So watch it this time. Let's see how this looks. And so there was a little jump there. You can tell where it went back in place. But one thing I could do is retime this so I can see, I'm scrubbing here and I say, okay, that's when it goes down. Then I'm gonna drag the edge here backwards, so my blend is happening at the exact same time when my arm is going down. And this is gonna look even better. So watch this, I think. Okay, so there's still a little bit of a jump there, but it looked a little bit nicer. I might adjust the blend. I might, try a few things, see what looks best. That looked the best of all. So it's a constant play back and forth thing, and then I will move on to the next step. So I'll say, okay, maybe, I just did his right arm there, so let's move on to the left arm instead. So let's do record, and it's the same thing. I'm going to take this, it's blending into the other pose, and then let's move on. And so this is my process. I just keep recording in these very short spurts, trying different gestures. If it doesn't work, I just undo, try again, and keep blending these small gestures over top of that general foundational rest pose. So how's this gonna look when you're all done? Well, this is the final project that I eventually brought into After Effects. This is the final look of the timeline. And let me just click the tilde key here to make this full screen. And this is what my dragger looks like for just one of the hands. And then my other hand, this is what that one looked like. So you get this kind of staircase, basically, of very short performances. So I'm doing exactly what I was saying. I just blend in these very short gestures, and I do it for each of the hands. Now, editing this can be very unwieldy, right? So it can be, just really difficult to say, okay, so at this time, what is happening here? And you're scrolling between, 150 or so takes. I think this piece all told was 156 takes. It can be kind of crazy, right? So the way I prefer to deal with things is actually twirling this up. So these little caret icons here will twirl things up, and then let's go back to the main timeline. You can see, let's zoom in a little bit, that I've got my different takes, and I can actually select them here and do all my blending or moving around directly at this level. So this is a much more condensed view, the rolled up view, as we like to call it, and I think it's just easier to use. You can kind of see everything at one glance. Sometimes when you see something like this, that means I have selected the underlying background track. So that's the rest pose of the hands. And anytime it's just one of these with a blend handle, that means it's the track that I did and blended a performance over top of. All right, so dragger's done, so I'm going to disarm that, and I'm gonna instead arm face. Now, most of the time, that's all you have to do. This character is a little more complicated because he's got a bunch of extra face behaviors for the parallax, so I'm just gonna make sure I have all of those selected, but generally, with simple characters, all you have to worry about is that one face performance. A common thing that I see in beginner character animator performances is they want to move around all the time. They want to, have this constant live one-to-one jumpiness of your character. And in traditional animation, we see more of what's called a pose-to-pose style of animation. So a character will start in one pose, and then they'll kind of move to the next, and maybe slight adjustment, and that sort of thing. So when I'm performing my face performance, I'm not really moving all the time and being very jumpy. I'm trying to be very deliberate in my poses, and sometimes pretty subtle. It does not take a lot to have the character, gesture back and forth. Now, rolled up into the face behavior is also control of your eyebrows. So as you're moving your head, you might also want to think about if your eyebrows are raised or lowered or a few other things. If I go into my face behavior here, I can see, I can change the tilt of how much they are when they're in their raised position or down. If I got eyebrow strength, how one-to-one are my eyebrow movements going to translate into movement of his own eyebrows. And then something I did for this particular character was move eyebrows together is checked by default, and that's going to move them at the same time. But there were a few instances where I wanted his, eyebrow to raise a little bit or look a little puzzled or that sort of thing. So for this character, I unchecked them, and it can lead to a little bit of jitter every once in a while. But overall, I liked the expressiveness that it was giving me more. So with all of this stuff, play around with these parameters, see what looks good for the quality of animation that you're going for, and then go for it. With a face performance, I'm not stopping and starting as much as I was with the dragger performances. I'm doing longer takes. I think in the final video, I maybe did only 3 or 4 takes for the whole head performance, because all you're really doing is, motioning and posing between different things. It's a pretty simple, straightforward process. So, and again, I'm reacting to what's being said. So a lot of times I will move my head at the different changes. So I'm looking at the waveform when he's talking, and now I move for the next thing. And then I'm gonna move here. And so I'm just kind of watching the waveform and listening to what he's saying and changing my poses based off of that. Now, because this guy also has the parallax, I don't always have to move my head. I can just kind of twist it a little bit to get some of that as well. So play around with it. Again, I would much rather do this than try to keyframe all of these into place. I think it's a much more natural, easier, faster way to do this type of character performance. If this takes, even with slow motion recording, this is gonna take, no more than 7.5 minutes. I can't do math. Is that right? I don't know. Anyway, something like that. All right, once I'm happy with how the face is looking, I can disarm that and move on to the last step, at least for this character, which is his triggers. Now, with triggers, I will not try try to address everything at the same time. So I'm not thinking about doing his eyes and his mouth and his hand triggers. I'm gonna focus on one trigger area at a time. So let's start with the simplest thing, which would be the hand, right? There's only one hand that is changing sometimes to a point. So I know like 30 seconds in, I know that he raises his hand, his right hand, and I want to do a point right there. So the way I'm gonna do this is I wanna time the hand transition. Normally, well, in this case, his hand's gonna be off the screen, so it really doesn't matter, but a lot of times I want to time the transition when the hand is in motion. So I really want to trigger it right around there when it's moving to help blend, make it not as clear. Because it's really obvious if I press 1 right now, it's really clear that his hand is changing, and I want it to be more of a fluid kind of hidden quality to it. So let's try this. Let's see if I can get the timing right. And I'll do it back out. Now that wasn't perfect, but it was pretty close. So what I can do now is go back and edit a little bit more. Let's look at when this point comes in. If I look at my my triggers track right here, I can see that hands is shown up and that the name of my trigger, which in this case was point, is showing up as well. So if I wanted to make that point happen a little bit later, I'm just gonna drag that and trim it in a little bit. And then if I wanted it to happen a little bit earlier here, I'm gonna drag it like that. Now, here's the nice thing is that I don't have to continue recording point triggers and keep on pressing 1 at the right time. What I actually could do is extend my take here just by dragging the edges. I could find another part where the character's arm was raised. Let's say this was a part, and I can actually just right click in this blank space, and I've got a choice between my different options. Now, open is the default, I don't really care about that, but point, I just click that and you'll see it's gonna make this very short little bar that I can then move around and manipulate. So a lot of times I'm not even pressing 1, I'm not trying to record, I'm never actually pressing the record button, I'm just dragging around, finding the appropriate place, right clicking, doing point, and just adjusting based off of that. I feel like it saves a lot of time in the long run to do it this way. It's just a little bit quicker, not always having to hit record, wait, make sure you get the timing right, go back and editing it. It's kind of all in one condensed step here. Now, the same principle is going to apply to the mouth or the eyes. So for example, let's just tackle the eyes now. So I see that 3 will do his happy eyes, 4 will do his impressed eyes, and 2 will do the half eyelids. So instead of doing the timing and saying, okay, I'm gonna press 3 right now or 4 right now, or the character also has controls panel here if I click the controls tab, and that's a nicer visual way to see things if you'd like to do it that way. But again, I think things are gonna move a little bit faster if I use that right click and edit method. So instead what I'm gonna do is, let's go back to the beginning, I'm gonna hit record for a second, I will let it record, I will press 2 to do a half eyelid trigger, press it again to untrigger it, and stop. And what that's gonna give me is my lids take and then this one part where half is showing up, right? So to play things back in what we call edit mode as opposed to live rehearsal mode. So right now, the reason when I'm over top of half and I'm not seeing half triggered over there, his eyes aren't at halfway down, his lids aren't halfway down like they should be, it's because I still have this triggered, it's ready to record, and it's ready for any new data to come in. And that means it doesn't it's not even looking, it doesn't care what's in the timeline, it's looking for new live data. So if I press 2, 3, 4, whatever, it's going to have that show up. If I want to see specifically what's in my timeline, what I do for that is disarm the main character here. And that just means my character is not ready to record right now. All I care about is just editing what's in the timeline. So anytime you want to switch between the live rehearsal mode and the recorded mode, just click on that, disarm it, and now you'll be able to see things. Okay, so that being said, I'm gonna hit minus a few times, and I'm going to extend this take for the entire length of the timeline. So now that that's extended, I have a full take and I can start to right click and add new eye positions in. So let's press plus a few times to get back here. And I can kind of drag, over here. Maybe at this point he's feeling a little happy. So I'm gonna right click and you'll see I've got my 3 options that are in the swap set here. So here I'm gonna do happy, and maybe that extends to here, and then I'll drag down a little bit and say, okay, here he's gonna be a little bit impressed. And notice when you're dealing with this, the reason I did the eyelid triggers after the pupils is because look what would happen if this was at halfway instead. You can see what happens here. The pupils are, in some instances, not going to work with your eyelid triggers. And so you might want to, that's why I always do the pupil performance first, because I want to make sure that the eyelids are going to work well with them. So let's do happy instead. That's going to look a little bit better. And so I will just go through, again, the entire timeline, listening and thinking about when I want to add some variety. A lot of times I just am swapping back and forth between his wide-eyed look and his half-eyed look. And then sometimes I will occasionally throw in these more extreme emotions of feeling impressed or happy. And again, I'll manipulate them, and a lot of times I will change them based off of the waveform up here. So I want him to start looking impressed when he starts talking about, this one particular fact that he's saying. Now, speaking from personal experience, for me, one of the most difficult parts of editing is lip sync editing. So honestly, 9 times out of 10, the automatic lip sync is going to do a great job, and it's going to look like, the right thing. We're using Adobe Sensei technology to say, okay, this is when he's saying an ah, ee, ooh, all these different sounds. And if I drag through my timeline here, I can see exactly those shapes showing up in my lip sync track. But there's going to be times where you want to edit things and something doesn't look right. And so you have a lot of tools at your disposal here. So if I want this E shape instead to be an O, I just right click it and I go to that O, and then it's automatically going to switch to that. If I wanted to happen a little later or earlier or whatever, I can manipulate that and move it around. If I feel like there's a vizine that's missing here, right? So if I feel like at this point, there's one syllable that I'm not quite hitting, I can select this, and I usually use this shortcut, but it's split. And that's going to split it into basically right where this current time indicator is, it's going to split it into an extra vizine. And then I can right click and add the appropriate sound that I want. But I feel like for me, I will do multiple passes of lip sync editing. And a lot of times I will save the lip sync editing until after I've rendered a recording from After Effects, when I can see everything running at its full frame rate and resolution and against everything else, and making sure that everything feels like it's lining up correctly. So the biggest thing that I look for are very clear mistakes, right? So blips that are happening after the character stops, talking, or before they start talking. Different things like that are very clear issues. Then I'll start to look for where there are long sounds that there should be more changes for, and that's when I'll do that split command to add a bunch of additional syllables. Then I'll look for just things that feel like mistakes, where it has an O sound and it really should be an eh sound. It doesn't feel like it's lining up. A lot of times, in general, if the mouth is a more open sound and the mouth is open, it's probably going to look okay. And if it's more closed, it's when it's a more closed sound like an or a s or something like that, again, it's going to look okay. So in regards to lip sync editing, the biggest takeaway I would say here is do what feels appropriate to your skill level. If you feel like you can hit every syllable exactly right, you're a professional, go for it. You do have the tools to allow you to do that. If you're more like me and you're more of an amateur in this sort of thing, you want to focus on those big glaring mistakes, fix those, and don't sweat the small details. In general, the automatic lip sync is going to work really, really well, better than if you tried to do it manually yourself. So don't lose sleep over it. It's going to be okay. One last step I'm going to take before I bring things into After Effects is to take out the lip sync only audio track and instead bring in my full audio mix that has the background music, the guy yelling "you're crazy," the processing where I made it the balanced male voice so it sounds a little louder and nicer. So what I'm going to do is import that final file. I already did that here, but again, you can go to File, Import, or double click on a blank area. And here I think it was Master 2 was the one I wanted. And so I'm going to drag that into my scene, and that's going to give me 2 audio tracks here. But they should be the same length if you set everything up correctly. And so if I just drag this over, I should see that the waveforms are lining up pretty much, except this one looks a little bit taller because it's the louder, more processed one, has the music in the background, all of that. And so I can just delete this other track and I'm set. I do this because, you could line things up in After Effects later on, but personally, I feel like this is the better way to go because now your lip sync and audio are always going to be connected one-to-one. And no matter what you do or manipulate in After Effects, you can be ensured that the audio track and the character's lip sync are going to be in sync. And with that, you're done with Character Animator. The recording process, you've added all these different components together, the eyes, the eyebrows, the face, the mouth, the arm gestures, the triggers, all of this stuff, it finally comes together when you play this back and you see the character has a real sense of emotion and life to them. And it's always really gratifying to see when it all comes together and you get this really nice performance. All right, so what the heck am I looking at here? So this is a Photoshop file that I have added a bunch of layers in that I know I'm going to manipulate later on in After Effects. This is my supplemental artwork. So remember earlier in the tutorial when we drew out all the different things that we wanted our character to react with, the different graphs and charts and icons and all of that stuff, that's what I'm starting to create here. So this is not, I'm building it up one at a time. I normally am not looking at it like this until I'm ready to export it out. But what I'll normally do is, okay, I've got my background layer here, and then I'm going to start drawing one asset. In this case, this was this fake, Penguin Quest video game that I created. I actually made that in its own group that's multiple layers that are put together and did that. And then I went on to the ultimate version. I basically would hide the other one and start working on this. And then I knew that I wanted the different prices to fly out of the bottom of the boxes, and so I did those. And so all I'm doing is going through that sketchbook and showing all these things that I know I'm going to manipulate. I want to make them all at a decent size. In reality, these show up a lot smaller in the final piece, but I want to make sure they're big enough that they're not going to get pixelated if I do have to scale them up or down or anything like that, and except for this case because this is supposed to be a pixelated indie game. So by the end of it, what you're doing is just compositing all these pieces together, and I'll just turn them all on before I bring them into After Effects because I do want to make sure I can access them all, and then I can move them individually as layers and position, rotate, scale, all the stuff that we're about to do later on. But I'd made 3 main files for this in this. So here's games number 1. This is the first section. Here's games number 2 and games number 3. And basically I just split it up so the file, one file wouldn't have everything in it and that accidentally got corrupted or I messed something up that it wouldn't mess up the whole video. Now for me, some things are just easier for me to do in Illustrator. So I also had an Illustrator document where I just drew a few things using their pen tool and their more vector-based tools, just because that felt more comfortable to me for certain styles of drawing. So you notice a lot of these elements ended up showing up and I would, copy and paste them into the final Photoshop file. But in terms of ease of drawing, it's okay to jump between different programs if you need to. Don't feel like you have to do everything in Photoshop if you feel like you're going to be a little bit better in Illustrator or something on the iPad Pro or additional things like that. Another fantastic resource that I used for this piece is thenounproject.com. And if you're doing an explainer, informational style video, this is an excellent resource. So let's say I wanted to do something about newspapers. So let's type newspaper, click that in, and all of a sudden I get all these different icons for newspapers. This is a fantastic resource. So I could say, okay, I'm really going with this kind of shaded in, darkened style. So let's click on this. Now you can either choose to do a pro download where you are paying the creator themselves, usually a pretty small amount, like $3 here, and then you don't need to do any attribution or anything like that. I did the basic download where I've got the Creative Commons license in there. You've got to include that as part of it, and it's going to show up in the file itself. But that looks pretty good. You say, okay, I'm doing this for your art project or whatever, and then you can choose to do it in a PNG or SVG file as a download. Finally, I've made it into After Effects. This is where everything starts to come together. The audio, the character performance, all that supplemental artwork. Everything is going to start to hopefully make sense when we bring it all in. So let's begin by creating a new composition. And I know that I want mine to be 1920 by 1080 for this particular piece. I'm going to do 24 frames per second because that's what I did in my character animator piece. And I'm going to click OK. So now I've got a comp 1, and you can think of a comp as a container for all your different elements coming together. So I'm going to double click in this area over here, and I could do that by file import as well. And let's find my character animator project to begin with. So in this case, it was called the aptly named Character Animator Project 57. I don't know how I keep track of all this stuff, but okay, let's hit open. And that's going to bring up my dynamic link dialog. Now I have a few different things that I recorded here. There's a few scenes where like there's a sword guy that I made in Character Animator as well. Red Monster shows up as a cameo, a few different things like that. Again, I can only make sense of my own file naming conventions. I know that Dave 2 was the correct one, so I'm going to select that scene and click OK. And what that does is bring in my Character Animator project as its own timeline, as its own asset. And so if I scrubbed around here, it's gonna take a while. After Effects, you have to render things. They don't immediately show up. You can change your settings over here in the preview panel. So a lot of times what I will do is when I'm trying to move things around and get things moving as quickly as possible, I'm gonna set my resolution to quarter, and I'm gonna skip every 2 frames. That just makes it run a little bit smoother and allows you to see things a little bit quicker. They might be a little more pixelated. They're not going to be perfect final, broadcast quality, but they're going to be able to let you run a little bit faster. Okay, so let's double click on the comp to go back to that, and then I'm going to select once my Chaproj file, my Character Animator project file, and I'm just going to drag that into my composition. So I had my composition open, and then I dragged this asset, this new Character Animator project file in here. And then I can manipulate, I can just drag and move this character around and put him wherever I want. I think in the beginning of the video, he starts down here. You've got a few options for manipulation, and the way I do this is normally with just these keyboard shortcuts, and you just have to learn these. This is just the way it goes. If this is your first time learning After Effects, I'm sorry, it gets a little crazy at times, but this is how it works. So if I want to reposition the character, normally I'm just gonna drag over them like this, but sometimes when you've got a lot of stuff on your canvas up here, it's gonna be a little bit crazy. So I'm gonna select it down here in my timeline and press P, and that gives me position sliders. And so here's my X position and here's my Y position. I can drag, or I could type something in, whatever, and it's going to allow me to do that. The next one that I use quite a lot is S. S is going to change scale of the character, and by default, X and Y position are locked together, but if you click this little link icon, that's going to stop it, and then you can make them stretch and do goofy things like that. But for the most part, that is not what I want, so I'm gonna undo all those steps and make sure that's on. 99% of the time, I have that link on. And then since we're going through some of these basic controls, R is going to do rotation, and that allows you to rotate the character a little bit if you wanted to, and then T for opacity, sometimes if I want the character to fade in and out. So these are just basic building blocks, right? These are very simple steps: positioning, scale, rotation, just really simple controls, but this is something I am constantly doing. I'm constantly moving and rotating and scaling my characters around. All right, so let's bring in one of those background files. So let's just double click here again to bring it in. Let's go to my games folder, and let's find one of those games thing. Let's just bring in games 3 right now. So this isn't footage, this is actually a composition, and I'm gonna do retain layer sizes. I wanna keep the size of my layers as they are. This is not a Photoshop sequence, so if that is checked, I'm going to uncheck that, and I'm going to click open. It's going to say this thing about styles. Merged is fine with me, but you can try it out depending on what your assets look like. All right, so what did that do? Well, that made this new comp called Games 3 that shows up based off my Games 3 PSD, and then all the layers are showing up here in my file as well. So if I double click on Games 3, that's going to open up that comp here. And you can see any comps you have open are going to show up as tabs in your timeline. So if I want to go back to comp 1, I just click here. But right now I'm looking at games 3. And you can see that it's my whole layer order exactly as I had in the Photoshop file. The only difference is now I've got a timeline attached to everything. So every layer now exists as something that exists over time. Now, there's a bunch of different ways to do this. Some people love to do pre-comps. Some people like to bring in layers one at a time. I'm going to actually just select all of these by selecting one layer, pressing Command A on Mac or Control A on Windows, and then I'm going to press Command C to copy on Mac, and that's Control C on Windows, and then I'm going to close that comp down. And then inside my my original composition, Comp 1, I'm going to press Command V. And now all of those elements are going to show up here. Now, those have all covered my main narrator guy, and normally I want him to be at the top. So I'm just going to take him from the bottom, drag him up here, and now he's showing up ahead of everything. All right, now there is no way I can make sense of all of this, basic illustrate. It looks like an illustrator just threw up on the screen, right? There's no way I'm gonna be able to make sense of all of this. So what I'm going to do is select these layers. I'm just gonna hold down Shift and select multiple layers. I'm just gonna drag all of these kind of out of the way, maybe 3 minutes in or something like that. So I've only now got my character, the paper background is showing up here, and then all these other elements I'm going to sandwich in between. So let's say I'm starting this section with this Penguin Quest 3 box that's coming in. And this is gonna show up as a comp here because this was a group inside Photoshop. So if I wanted to manipulate any of the individual elements here, I can just double click PQ and that's gonna show up as its own composition. And so if I say, oh, you know what? I want that TM to be a little bit more transparent. I can select that, press T. Photoshop's original opacity there was 50%, but if I wanted to change it to 25, I can do that here. So you can do a little bit of manipulation here. Most times I'm gonna go back to the original Photoshop file if I'm manipulating the artwork, but there's some nice tricks you can do here. So let's X out of that, go back to our main comp, and now it's time to start thinking about how things animate in and out. So let's press plus a few times so we're a little bit closer in, and now I'm at kind of a second level. So I'm at 1 second, 2 second, 3 second, and I know I'm kind of working at 24 frames per second. All right, so let's start to manipulate this. I'm going to select PQ, Penguin Quest layer. I'm gonna press S for scale, and I'm just going to scale it down a little bit. That looks pretty good. And then I'm going to use my selection arrow up here, selection tool, and let's say this is basically where I want it to end up. I'm also gonna change where the origin is. I don't want this to be, this little crosshair thing, this is kind of like the origin, the anchor point of where things will rotate or scale around. If I go up to this pan behind anchor tool and just drag the anchor over to the middle of the box, that's gonna work slightly better. So anytime it looks like things are scaling or moving or rotating weird, it's probably because the anchor point is somewhere completely different depending on your composition. Okay, so if I know this is where I want this particular piece to end up, I'm going to press P for position, and I'm going to click the little stopwatch icon that's right here. That is going to create what we call a keyframe. So that's saying at this moment, these values right here, this is the position that I want you to have. Okay, so that looks pretty good, but let's say maybe half a second before I want it to be off of the screen. So I'm just going to drag the CTI to where I want it to start from, and then I'm just gonna drag it off the screen like this. Or a lot of times what I'll do is just manipulate the values down here until I can get it off the screen. And you'll notice that automatically created this new keyframe down here. So what's gonna happen is as I scrub through, you can see it's going to kind of do the in-betweening. It's gonna say, okay, at this time, at 1.5 seconds, you're off the screen. At 2 seconds, you're at this part of the screen. So I'm gonna fill in the middle, the in-between part, and get it from point A to point B. So if I went back and I pressed the spacebar key, it's gonna take a second to render, but it's gonna go kind of slow and choppy, but you can see what's happening here. It slides in from the left to the right. Now when you start to see these little green things here, that means it's rendering, it's got rendered frames for your video, and so the next time you go and play it back, it's gonna move a little bit smoother. So a lot of times when you're rendering things, you will let it render, let it kind of chug along, and then go back to the beginning and watch everything at a slightly smoother rate. So that's looking pretty good. I think I also want it to rotate though at the same time. So I want to be able to still see these keyframes though while I'm bringing it in as rotation. So all I'm going to do is, still with my Penguin Quest comp selected, is press Shift and R. And that's also going to bring up rotation. Now, to make sure I'm on the exact point, same point that this keyframe was, I'm going to use these little keyframe controls over here. So I'm going to press the right arrow, and when this lets me move between my different keyframes, left and right. When this is blue, that means it's on a current keyframe. And now, because I know that's where it's going to be off the screen, that's, you know, kind of position A for it, I'm going to click rotation as well, and that's going to create a rotation keyframe. And then if I click right here, it's going to move to that other extreme position, and I'm going to create another keyframe there. Now I want it to kind of remain up like that, but as it's coming in, actually when it's off screen, I think I want it to rotate a little bit more. So let's do this. I'm going to press the, hold down the space bar, and I'm just going to click and drag. And so I can still see my main image with these guides, even though it's off the main screen. And in this case, I think I want it to rotate a little bit. So it has this nice slide, and it kind of rotates into place as it's coming in. Now I'm noticing that, you know, the box is not looking that it's peeking over the edge, and that's not what I want to do. So I'm going to manipulate the position just a little bit so it starts off of the screen. So now let's press spacebar and see how this looks. Okay, so that looks a little bit better. It has a little bit more drama to it. It looks a little nicer. If I wanted to, I could press Shift and S, and that's also gonna let me see scale at the same time. And then so I can click here, get scale. Maybe I wanted to, actually, let's make my, I wanna make my two keyframes first, because I always wanna have my rest position. I wanna have my, you know, final position where it ends up. And then when it starts, let's say I want it to be a little bit more scaled down. So let's bring that down. And then spacebar, and I can see that all come together. If I'm being honest, what I just showed you is 90% of all I did in this video. I am just manipulating objects coming in and out of the screen and moving around and scaling and rotating and fading and position and all of that stuff while the character talks over on the side. Now, the cool thing about the character is you can manipulate him or her in exactly the same way that you are manipulating your other stuff. So if I wanted this character, for example, to scale up and go to the middle of the screen, I could make sure that P is pressed for position. I'm going to press Shift and S for scale, and I'm going to keyframe both of those. And then let's say half a second later, I want him to show up here. And all I'm going to do is click these little diamonds to add a new keyframe. And then let's do something where he scales up like that. I probably don't want him to go too high over 100% where he's going to look pixelated. And then I'm going to drag him over here to reposition him. And now you can see that over time, he's going to move and scale up slightly. Actually, let's make him a little bit smaller to begin with so it's a more of a dramatic effect. So let's go down there, something like that. And then I was just using the arrow keys, by the way, to move him around. And let's see how this looks now. And then he scales up like that. When I've decided I'm done with Penguin Quest, I want it to leave, I will just basically click and drag over top of these to set one more keyframe, and then let's press plus to see a little bit closer where we are. Half a second later, I'm gonna click all these again, and then I'm gonna start manipulating the values and bring it back out. So let's rotate it back like this, let's scale it down, and let's bring it out of the frame like that. So the whole thing would look something like this for this manipulation. It comes in, it stays there, and then it's going to slide out. Now for me, I'm currently done with this, right? I don't want it kind of sticking around here in the background. I mean, it's not hurting anybody over there, but for cleanliness of the timeline, I'm gonna actually cut this off here. And the way I'm gonna do that is press Option and bracket on, right bracket on the Mac. And I think that's Alt and right bracket on PC. And that's just going to make it basically disappear. So now, 10 seconds in, that is not there anymore. That layer is not visible. So that just helps make your timeline a little bit easier. Once you have done that step, I'm going to add some easing to the keyframes. This is just a nice finishing touch that's going to make it feel a little bit not as robotic, not as, it's in one position and then crudely it moves to the next position. It's just gonna feel nicer. It's just gonna look professional. Just trust me on this one. So all I'm gonna do is marquee select all of these, and I'm just going to click function F9, and that's the shortcut for that function. For the Mac, I have to press down the Fn key and then F9. You also have the ability to right click and go to keyframe assistant. I usually use Easy Ease. You have a ton of different options though to be able to make this and fine tune this as fast or as slow as you want. But for me, a lot of the time, I'm fine with just using Easy Ease. All right, so let's watch this back now. Kind of eases in a little bit nicer and eases out. It's a little bit subtle. It would look better in the final piece, but you get the idea. So once I'm done with that, I'm ready to move on to the next thing. So let's say, the next is this other box coming in. So I'll press minus a few times. I'll drag this piece over. I will press plus to move in a little bit closer, and I will start to manipulate the same way. Positioning, scale, rotation, all of that stuff, exactly like we just saw. So this is what the final project looked like, at least 1/3 of it. I ended up splitting into 3 parts. So this is games A, and then here's games B, and game C. So I know this can look really overwhelming if this is your first time in After Effects. I certainly felt that way when I picked this up, over 15 years ago when I was first learning After Effects. It's something that's going to take time, and something that there's no way I'm going to be able to cover everything in, this tutorial. But I just want to show you kind of the end result of, these basic position, scale, rotation changes. That's all that's really happening here. So let's start to look at some of this stuff step by step. So the character scales down. You'll see that rotating, thing behind the Instasock. All I'm doing is, position, rotation, scale stuff. Very simple. I had the second character that came in, rotation. You can start to see scale. All it is, when you really break it down, it's just really simple transform things that are happening. So a couple of tips that might help along in your animation process if this is your first time using After Effects. Number one, see this column right here with the little ball icon? That is motion blur. If you're not seeing it, click this little toggle switches modes down here, and that's going to switch between your blending modes and some other stuff, and instead show you this column. You want to click this to toggle and make sure it's on for everything. If you see something like this that has a little line, that means it's a comp, and inside the comp you would want to make sure that all those things are have motion blur on as well. And then to enable motion blur, you want to make sure this is set to blue, that this icon is toggled blue, which means as things move around, motion blur is going to happen. And so even in this state, I should be able to see things a little bit blurry as they transition and move. Yeah, you can kind of see that in between. It just adds a nice professional touch. Everything looks a little bit nicer when you add a little bit of motion blur. The second thing, sometimes you want multiple elements to move together at the same time. So for example, $60 down here and Penguin Quest 3, these are 2 separate elements, but I do want the $60 to kind of always move with Penguin Quest 3. So if I find my layers here, I can see that $60 is here and Penguin Quest is here. To connect $60, so it's going to follow wherever Penguin Quest goes, I click this little swirly icon here. I actually click and drag, and we call this the pick whip. And so I'm going to pick whip $60 to Penguin Quest, and now it's going to show up as this is connected. This is linked to Penguin Quest. So now when I move Penguin Quest around, look what's happening. $60 is moving around at the same time. So this is something I'm doing consistently. I am always moving multiple things together. In fact, at any given time in this composition, there's almost always something moving. Even if it's just an icon on the screen, there's probably some subtle scaling going on, or there's multiple elements that are moving at the same time. So I use this a lot, and you can see that here, parent and link. You can see that a lot of stuff is linked to other things. I want multiple things moving at the same time. And that includes something called a null layer. So sometimes you want multiple things to move at the same time, but you don't want just one layer to control them all. You kind of want an invisible force to move them all. And that's where nulls come in. So I do this a lot as well. I'm going to go to Layer, New, null object. That's going to create basically this invisible little handle that I'm going to be able to connect things to. So if I want the credits, for example, to move with null47, I'm just going to pick whip the credits to null47. And now let's go back to where the credits are, which is at the very end here. I can move the credits on their own, sure, I can manipulate them like that, but because they're connected to null47, I can also manipulate null47, and I can keyframe it, and I can do whatever I want, and I can connect as many things as I want to a single null. And that gives me a great level of control. So if I have multiple elements, icons, or objects that I want to move and scale at the same time, I'm just gonna connect them all to a null layer and then manipulate that null layer instead of a physical artwork layer. So my general takeaway here, my general advice is use After Effects at the level that you feel comfortable with. If you are a beginner, just do those basic position, scale, rotation, transforms, add some motion blur, do a few null objects. It's gonna look pretty great still. And as you advance and as you use After Effects or do other tutorials online and continue to learn the program, you can continue to add new stuff and layers on top of everything. All right, so once you're done with all of that, I've got this one mega comp, Games Mega Mix, where I actually put 3 different comps. I broke up things into 3 different sections and then combined them all together. I have a black solid that fades out at the end over top of the credits, but that's how I set mine up. Just make sure whatever you have is selected over here and then go to File, Export, Add to Adobe Media Encoder Queue. So that's going to open up Adobe Media Encoder, and this allows you to render out your final piece in the best possible quality. So you might see different defaults here. It might be, a different MOV file or something like that. I'm just going to click on whatever's here in my format. And then I'm going to see my full export settings. Now you have a lot of different options here of the type of format you want. They have some presets in terms of professional settings that are going to look as good as possible. And you can scrub through and see different frames at full quality to see get an idea of what they're going to look like. This is helpful too because if your sizing is different or something like that, you're going to see black bars or pixelation problems or things like that. So it's helpful to see this as a little preview. For me, these are great. H.264 and match source high bitrate, those are perfect for what I'm trying to go for. Output name, let's call this something different. I'm going to click on this. I'm going to change the destination folder to somewhere where I could actually find it, which is going to be on the desktop. And let's just call this Games Draft. Now you're saying, wait, I'm rendering this out. This is final. No, this is a draft. Trust me. You're going to see mistakes. You're going to want to edit stuff. We're going to do this. Your first version is always going to be a draft. So just trust me on this one. Everything else is looking good. The size, the frame rate. So I'm going to click OK. And once we're ready to go, click the little green play icon. And now you can go grab a snack, grab a coffee, whatever you want, because the rendering process has started. And this little sliver of blue over here, in about, an hour and 15 minutes, that's going to be finished rendering. So yeah, rendering at full quality is gonna take some time to add all the motion blur, to add everything together, looking as good and sounding as good as it does. It's not something that happens instantaneous. So this is gonna take a while, just let your computer sit. Once your video file is finished rendering, open it up and grab a notebook and pen and watch it. And when you notice a mistake, when it looks like, the lip sync isn't lining up correctly, or a character isn't moving as quickly as you would want, or anything that you see, stop it, make a note of what time it's at, and make a little note about it. So I will do this several times, several iterations with every video. I think I did this 3 or 4 times with this video where I watched the whole thing multiple times. I took a big laundry list of notes of things that I wanted to fix, both in the, all the way in the original Photoshop artwork, either for the character or the supplemental assets, to the character animation, if it felt like the lip sync wasn't looking right at a particular part, or his emotions or stuff didn't fit with what was happening in the scene. And then finally, all the things in After Effects. And a lot of times that's, things lingering on the side of the screen that you thought were gone, or oops, I forgot to add motion blur to this, particular logo, or that sort of thing. Watch it several times. go through the steps of rendering out a new video, watch it again, and keep doing that until you only see like 2 or 3 mistakes that no one else is gonna see, and you're like, okay, that's all right. So that's it. That is the whole process. So we went all the way from just basic words on a page, some scribbles in a notebook, all the way to this final rendered piece that looks pretty good. So this whole project from beginning to end probably took me about 5 or 6 days, I would say. And that includes the script writing, the character creation, the recording, the editing, all the compositing, all the art asset generation, all of that stuff. So yeah, this is gonna take some time. If you're gonna wanna, you wanna make a 5-minute explainer style video like this, it's not something that you're gonna just snap your fingers and it's gonna get done. It does take some time and effort to put together. But for me, Character Animator really is the missing link in all of this. The Character Animator allows me to have this narrator character that goes through the entire process and is relatively fun and easy to animate. Instead of fiddling around with little keyframes or trying to make things look like they're natural, I just talk and act naturally, and it translates into a cool animated performance. So I hope this was a helpful look at my process. This is just one way of doing things. This is the way that I do things. There's all sorts of different ways and avenues in and out of creating a cool animated video, but for me, this worked well. This let me tell my story in a fun animated way, and I hope it helps you as well. All right, that's it for today. Thank you very much for watching. And if you end up creating an explainer style video using the techniques that we learned in today's tutorial, I'd love to see what you create. So please share it on social media with #CharacterAnimator. And if none of this is making sense, or you got stuck at a certain part or anything like that, the best place for help is the official Adobe Character Animator forums, where people from the team or the community can help answer your questions. All right, that's it for today. Thank you very much for watching, and have fun.